But after intense fighting on the 5th day, Thompson called a temporary halt to the advance. Not only were the Marines encountering stiff enemy resistance, the weather was also no help.
It was misty rain and very cold. And that precluded air support. I think we had it 2 or 3 days. The sky would open, the sun would pop out, and we'd get a few strikes in, but that was it. It was very difficult to get helicopters in because of the weather and the ground fire. Getting our dead and wounded Marines off the battlefield was a terrible problem. We lost, some men died because we couldn't.
In addition to problems evacuating the dead and wounded, the Marines were having trouble getting ammunition and food.
Myself and a couple other guys started scrounging through some houses looking for food. I can remember these goldfish were in this aquarium. About the first night we were there, I went back to see about stealing these goldfish and frying them up, but somebody had already beat me to it.
The North Vietnamese, on the other hand, had no problem reinforcing its troops inside Hue. That's because the U.S. Army's 1st Cavalry Division, fighting on the outskirts of Hue, had failed to seal off the city.
The primary prerequisite for combat in an urban terrain is to isolate and cut off the battle area. This was never done.
The west gate, the west wall, was the NVA's resupply and reinforcement line. And they had a tremendous supply line, reinforcing them on a 24-hour basis.
Marine Lieutenant Alex Wells, 24, from Chattanooga, Tennessee, had been sent into Hue as a forward observer to call in the artillery for Arvin. Choppered in under fire the day before the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines arrived, Wells and his radio man were taken to an Arvin outpost near Teen Tom Lake.
I really had no earthly idea how in the world I was going to get out of this mess until the 5th Marines got there, and I figured, well, they'll rescue me, and the minute they get across the river, I'll be with them, and everything will be fine, and, you know, they'll wipe out all these bad guys. Well, that never really happened.
From his position inside the ruins of a Buddhist temple, Wells called in H&I, or harassment and interdiction fire, from the 155s at Phu Bai. He targeted areas along the west wall of the Citadel controlled by the NVA.
And every hour or so, we'd fire on these different numbered targets. And of course, you know, I numbered my own position as a target in case we were overrun.
For his part, Major Thompson rested his troops on February 18th, despite increasing pressure to get on with the battle.
It was the only show in town at that time. We were 12 days late. And Lyndon Johnson was very adamant about getting it over with.
The Marines resumed their attack the next day, making modest advances against an enemy that remained well entrenched.
It was not a kind of battle that you could hide diddle-diddle up the middle. Everybody outside still had the straw hut mentality. They had not adjusted to this kind of warfare.
There were 1,000 places that a rifle or a machine gun could be placed to fire at you that you just really had no awareness until they started firing at you where it was coming from.
I think the thing that I remember the most that really bothers me is just seeing Marines laying lifeless on the streets. It wasn't a matter of if you were going to die daily at Hue, it was a matter of when.
By this time, some of the Marines were suffering from shell shock.
They just had seen too much. Too many of their friends being killed, too much violence, too much noise, too much fear, that their brains had shut down.
Still, by the end of the 7th day, the Marines were within 3 blocks of a key objective, the Tong Tu Gate. A few days later, the Marines inched even closer when they finally made it to the southeast wall.
Well, now we're down to the bitter end, to the wall.
About halfway back from the front lines in the Citadel, Major Thompson gave us an interview.
So right now we're waiting for ammunition resupply tank.
And there was a shell burst close enough, within 100 yards or so.
And to,
Thompson hardly blinked. He just kept on talking. I was so frightened that I dropped out of the picture, and if you look at the frame, you see my head drop down for an instant and then pop up again when I realized I hadn't been hit. I was always impressed at how steady Major Thompson's nerves were and how unsteady mine were.
Finally, the Marines sent in another company, Lima 3-5, to reinforce Thompson's badly decimated battalion.
Here was that final little bit of emphasis and impetus that we needed to make that final push to secure the area.
The next day, February 22nd, Lima attacked down the southeast wall and captured the Tongtu Gate and Tower.
The skies opened up. Here comes the airstrikes in, napalm, and the L Company Marines were within 50 meters of napalm. I mean, it was beautiful, just like you would write a script.
Meanwhile, Alpha Company was also finishing its final assault.
We have to charge across one area up towards the Citadel wall. And I thought, well, this is it. This is the morning I'll get it, because, you know, I'm gonna run out of luck. And we charged across that wall full speed, and there wasn't a shot fired at us. And we hit the top of that wall. The feeling was fantastic.
It wasn't until February 25th, 3 days later, that the Citadel was declared fully secure, and in early March, the Marines pulled out of the city. But the brutal battle for Hue marked the end of the TET offensive, an offensive that proved disastrous for enemy forces, especially the Viet Cong.
From the military perspective, the Viet Cong suffered an estimated 50,000 dead and really destroyed them as an effective military force, at least for the time being.
Even so, many believe that the U.S. came out the loser.
We had inflicted massive casualties on the enemy, and yet at the same time, we demonstrated to the American public that we were no closer to overall victory than we had been before. And many Americans, not the least of whom was Walter Cronkite, began questioning the basic assumptions and the reports coming from Vietnam.
The battle for Hue.
Cronkite had flown to South Vietnam to witness the TET offensive, particularly the bloody battle for Hue.
If the communist intention was to take and seize the cities, they came closer here at Hue than anywhere else.
Less than a week after he returned, Cronkite declared the Vietnam War a stalemate.
But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could.
In the case of the 2,500 Marines who retook the city of Hue and did the best they could, they suffered a 50% casualty rate, 142 dead, and almost 1,100 wounded.
I don't think you can say enough about the incredible courage of those young Marines that won that battle of Hue City.
We fought for each other. We really did. And we were very close and tight that way.
They were a band of brothers because they shed their blood together. And it wasn't anything else. It wasn't the Stars and Stripes. It wasn't anything except each other. And they were heroes.